There are at times striking parallels between the story of Adventism and the story of the United States of America, as in the struggle with the issue of discrimination as a result of race, and particularly in an effort to place non-white members in leadership functions. The fact that unseen hands are said to have prepared the way for a great church mission to black communities has strengthened confidence in the movement, in spite of a corrosive effort by acts of members who came to the church from other areas where segregation was a way of life. In 1799, a bill was passed beginning the gradual emancipation of slaves in New York State by more than half a century before Lincoln's proclamation. The first independent act of Negroes was to sever all connections with white churches which had assigned them sections marked BM, meaning black members. The movement extended into every denomination, beginning when Negroes broke away from the Methodist Episcopal Church and started the African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church. To the Negro, his church was the center and stronghold of his independent existence, a refuge and a shelter for many runaway slaves, a meeting place, a platform. It cared for the sick and gave food and other assistance to the destitute. Above all, it developed strong and intelligent leaders through whom black people learned to stand with confidence, united in a common understanding of their destiny. For Seventh-day Adventists, the close of the Civil War provided a clear signal to begin evangelism among the black population of the U.S. Plantation owners had held an unchallenged power over Negro field hands that could deny them conversations with anyone whose motives might be suspect. This rendered a gospel mission to the captive laborers almost impossible. The entire South's economy strongly depended upon the barbaric system of bondage. Slaveholders seemed little disposed to risk indoctrination of their workforce by outsiders, especially by invaders from the North, who might question the propriety of one man's holding another in a lifetime of servitude. Hard work for slaves was looked upon as a prime necessity, and anyone who advocated a rest day for them, a Sabbath as set forth in the Ten Commandments, or any free time other than Sunday, would do so at the peril of his own life. Unquestionably, the Civil War, therefore, and its resulting emancipation of slaves, marked a turning point in the development of Adventist work in America. Until the slaves were free, no effort to bring the three angels' messages to this vast population could have been successful. Without the Civil War, there would not have been the glowing accounts of faith and accomplishments for God throughout America's vast Southland. The war between the states thus became a divine act, a liberation tantamount to the freeing of the children of Israel. On the other hand, this setting free of captives created some new problems. Reconstruction and all of its abuses followed, as did segregation laws, Ku Klux Klan raids, terrorism, lynching, and widespread civil disorder. These tragic developments would affect the progress and direction of Adventist work throughout every decade. Church leaders faced heartbreaking decisions as they proceeded with plans to work in the same region for descendants of former masters and descendants of former slaves. Three people were major architects of the black work and wielded primary influence on its initial development. First and foremost was Ellen White. Her influence was consistently in favor of the equality and inclusion of black people in the church. Ellen White articulated the Adventist position toward the fugitive slaves, the freedom of black people, and God's judgment toward the U.S. in relation to slavery as demonstrated in the Civil War. It was Ellen White's message that motivated and inspired those who later worked in the South. In 1891, Ellen White delivered an historic presentation entitled Our Duty to the Colored People. This watershed message to the General Conference session in Battle Creek was the first major appeal to the SDA Church on behalf of developing a systematic work for black people in the South. Her words were instrumental in influencing her son, James Edson White, to dedicate his efforts to the work among black people in the South. Second in influence was James Edson White. Edson White and his Morning Star Steamboat Ministry Initiative were main catalysts for assertive efforts on behalf of black people. Seizing the need to coordinate all the efforts in the South on behalf of blacks, Edson White established the Southern Missionary Society, SMS, in 1895. Edson staffed the independent and self-supporting organization with a group of ministry-minded volunteers. For more than 2 decades, its groundbreaking work promoted education, health, evangelism, and general self-betterment among black people. This Mississippi River steamboat steamed up and down the Mississippi waterways for close to a decade. The boat was privately owned by Edson White and began operating in 1894. The Morning Star represents the first serious organized effort by Adventists for black people. Finally, Charles M. Kinney was the third major influence on the black work. As the first black person to be ordained as a Seventh-day Adventist minister and the first black church worker and spokesperson among black people, Kinney can rightfully be called the father of the black work. A slave from birth, Kinney was born in Richmond, Virginia. Moving west after the Civil War, Kinney ended up in Reno, Nevada, where he attended evangelistic meetings held by J.N. Loughborough. Won to the truth through the preachings of Loughborough and Ellen White, Kinney ever held dear his acquaintances with them and the fact that he had learned the Adventist truth from them. Kinney was an independent thinker and became the first to articulate the concerns of black Adventists in the areas of race, church policy, and organizational quality. For 2 decades, Kinney labored throughout the South on behalf of blacks, preaching to anyone who would listen to his message. He believed that black people needed to grow in 3 areas to reach their potential: education, experience, and economic development. An avid belief of his was that Seventh-day Adventist doctrine could provide the spiritual needs of black people or any disadvantaged people. He did everything in his power to see that his people received a knowledge of the truth and that the Adventist Church did all it could to advance the black work. The concept of black conferences was suggested by Kinney when confronted by efforts to segregate him and his members at a camp meeting on the day of his ordination. He advocated black conferences as a way to work more effectively among blacks and to help ease the racial tensions in the church. Before his death, he was blessed to see the black work expanded beyond his highest expectations. Charles Kinney's story is one of struggle, faith, persistence, and even triumph. In 1909, the American Negro Department was formed to foster the work among blacks. In 1941, the name was changed to the North American Colored Department and changed to the North American Regional Department in 1954. The department was discontinued in 1978. The first secretary of this new department was J.W. Christian, a Caucasian. In 1918, W.H. Green, a Washington, D.C. lawyer turned Adventist clergyman and a former pastor of City Temple, became the first African-American leader of the department. For the next 10 years, Green worked out of his Detroit residence, as he was never given an office from which to operate. This brought further tensions to bear on the relationship between the races. By the time F.L. Peterson was appointed in 1930, the GC offices had provided office space for him at the GC headquarters. As blacks were given greater responsibilities, partly because the union conferences were encouraged to organize colored departments where memberships warranted it, a large group of talented leaders emerged, and they were effective advocates for their people. Adventists were held together and encouraged to faithfulness by the likes of W.H. Green, F.L. Peterson, and G.E. Peters, all secretaries of the GC Color Department, Union and State Evangelist J.W. Ellison, J.G. Thomas, F.S. Kitts, T.W. Coopwood, J.G. Descent, M.M. Young, O.A. Troy, J.A. Wagner, W.W. Fordham, Sidney Scott, and J.H. Lawrence, along with Thomas Branch, missionary to Africa. These men exhibited administrative skills while being, above all, powerful expositors of the Word, who presented the doctoral positions of Adventism with clarity, conviction, and persuasion. According to Calvin Rock, in several cities, strong congregations were being developed, and a number of absolutely brilliant, powerful black preachers were now in the pastorate. Some became almost household names in black Adventism, like P.G. Rogers, F.C. Phelps, W.D. Ford, A.N. Durant, B.M. Abney, T.M. Roll, R.L. Bradford, J. Campbell, J.H. Lawrence, U.S. Willis, M.G. Nunez, H.W. Kibbles, T.M. Fontaine, and many more. At the 1929 Spring Council, African-American Adventist pastors, greatly influenced by J.K. Humphrey, petitioned the General Conference for authorization to organize colored conferences. The item was placed on agenda for the Fall Council, and a commission was appointed to give study to the matter during the interim. After vigorously debating the pros and cons of the issue at length, since African American leadership was by no means united on this issue, General Conference leaders, according to F.L. Peterson, advised the African American brethren to go back to their districts and not to bring up the subject again until Jesus comes. The remarkable thing about the whole experience is that black ministers did indeed go back to their districts and continue to work in the African American church. During World War II, there was a strong push for integration on the national scene. President Roosevelt had signed an executive order banning discrimination by race in the defense industry. Intelligent and thoughtful African American Adventists who loved and supported their church and wanted to see it lead the way in matters of human dignity were moved to address the situation. Should the church lag behind the world? Through a series of events, General Conference leaderships were made keenly aware that black Adventist laypeople were extremely dissatisfied with the church's slow progress in race relations. The volcano erupted when Lucy Bird from New York City was admitted to the Washington Sanitarium, but upon discovering that she was not white, hospital administrators had her transferred to Freedman's Hospital for African Americans. Lucy died in transit. A group of laypersons, largely from the Edifice Church in Washington, D.C., formed the National Association for the Advancement of Worldwide Work Among Colored Seventh-day Adventists, to seek redress for the many indignities to which African Americans were subjected. The General Conference leaders immediately dispatched the Vice President for North America to visit the lay group. The GC representative was surprised at the quality of the committee and the depth of their resolve. Suddenly, GC leadership was convinced that the time had come for a change in the colored work. The change was not full integration, but to the glory of God, a school of preparation for African Americans that would enrich the worldwide fellowship. J. L. McElhaney, General Conference President, W. H. Branson, GC General Vice President, and J. J. Netherly, President of the Lake Union, became change agents. African American pastors may have initially brought up the idea of colored conferences in 1929, but in 1944 it was placed on the agenda by the most powerful leaders in the denomination. At the spring meeting of the GC Committee, held in Chicago, Illinois in 1944, the question was first put to a delegation of African American leaders. Many of them were skeptical as to the reason for the rumored establishment of black conferences. But when McElhaney, Branson, and Netherly made strong speeches, the vote was clear: African American conferences would be organized. W.A. Spencer, former GC president, joined his brethren in arguing persuasively that a black brother who could successfully administer a church of 500 or 600 members could surely administer a conference. The item was placed on the agenda, discussed by a full council, and passed without any serious opposition. The Lake Region Conference was the first to be organized. African American Adventist leaders were not all agreed on the issue. A number of them felt that nothing less than total integration was acceptable. Some of them went along with the proposition grudgingly. In their struggle to make the church all that God would have it to be, blacks have differed on methodology and structure, but never on message and mission and ultimate goal. The presence of African Americans in the Seventh-day Adventist Church has been positive. The very people of whom it was said they don't stink has exhibited extraordinary growth in membership and finance year after year. African American Adventists have developed a survival skill that has enabled them to maintain their loyalty in spite of. In the plans and purpose of God, the whole church may profit by its experience of its African American brothers and sisters.